Aloha and welcome to our second week of Hana Noʻeau. For this week, we're going to focus on voyaging and moana nui ʻIke and looking at how kupuna applied Noʻeau to the practice of traversing, navigating, and traveling across vast oceans. It's important for us to remember that Hawaiians, like many other oceanic peoples, ended up here on purpose, using the stars, the waters, the winds, and the animals above and below to guide them to navigate vast distances. And it's also important to remember that this happened many centuries before Europeans even left their continent. So voyaging across the Pacific and in Hawaii was basically a very advanced form of knowledge, of science, of observation. And there's great skill and ingenuity involved in it. People would often study for years under a master to learn every current, star change, how to read the wind, the rains, the different animals of the ocean and the sky. So voyaging was not a simple process by any means, but was actually very complicated and took years to master. We also have to recognize that oceanic peoples, including the Hawaiians, populated the largest area on the Earth's surface. About 1/3 of the Earth's surface is the Pacific Ocean and more. So Hawaiians, like many other Polynesian, Micronesian, Melanesian, and oceanic peoples broadly, traveled across these oceans using great skill, wisdom, and knowledge to be able to traverse long distances to go home, explore, and come back.
Aloha, today we're here at Kaunolu, which was once the socio-political center of Lanai in traditional Hawaiian times. We're actually standing right in front of the Kauhaleo Kamehameha, or Kamehameha's house site, when he was residing here for fishing. And it was said Kaunolu was one of his most favorite fishing spots in all of Hawaii. So what's actually interesting about Kaunolu is that it subdivides into two parts of different ahupua'a. So where we're standing now is actually the ahupua'a of Kealiakapu, and across the gulch, across the way, that's actually the ahupua'a of Kaunolu. And so what is interesting about understanding where we are and acknowledging the traditional place names of these areas is that when we're thinking about mo'olelo and the stories and the knowledge that's passed down through mo'olelo, names also carry meaning. And so we encourage all of you to learn the traditional place names of different places on Lanai, and we're going to be sharing a few of the different place names and some of their meanings of this area as well. So the ahupua'a we're standing in, Kealiakapu, translates to the restricted salt bed. So salt was a very important resource for this area, and so kapu means, taboo, but also restricted. So that would be reserved for ali'i, whereas the ahupua'a over is Kealia Aupuni, which is the salt beds for the people. And then we're going to travel that way so we can hear more place names. So Kaunolu is also a significant place associated with voyaging, and so you can see this in all the different place names and their translations for this area. Behind me, these cliffs are called palikoholo. Pali meaning cliffs, kaholo meaning to travel or a path. And in particular, the ahupua'a that borders that large cliff in the back is called kalulu. Kalulu means the shelter, and canoes and voyaging canoes in particular would make li or rest in the shelter of the cliff prior to going on to kahiki. So on the other side of this area between Lanai and Ko'olave is Kealai Kahiki, or the path to Tahiti, and that's the path that canoes would take if they were trying to go back to Kahiki. But before their voyage, they would rest here in the lee of Palikoholo, in particular Kalulu.
One really important mo'olelo over here is that of Kane Apua. So we know the gods Kane and Kanaloa, and they have the younger brother Kane Apua. And all of this also takes place long before Kaulula'au came to Lanai to rid it of the spirits and make it able for human habitation. So before people were here, we had Kane, Kanaloa, and Kane Apua coming from Kahiki and to Hawaii, where they stayed here at Kaunolu. While they were here, Kane and Kanaloa, his older brothers, were really thirsty. So they sent their younger brother, Kane Apua, up to find a spring to get them fresh water. So he climbs up the rocks and the hills and tries to find a spring. Eventually he sees one. So he gets his gourd and puts it down to gather some fresh water for his brothers. But at the same time, he also really had to use the bathroom. So he urinates, and then some of that mimi gets into the gourd that is gathering the fresh water. So Kaneapua finishes, he fills the gourd and then caps it and gets ready to walk back down to his brothers. So he makes the hike down, scaling the cliff, there's the rocks that he's trying to get around, and eventually gets back to them. His brothers are so thirsty, they open the ipu and they take a big gulp. But it doesn't taste quite right. They can tell that some of his mimi made it into the water. So Kane and Kanaloa were so upset that they turned back into bird form and flew all the way back to Kahiki, leaving their younger brother Kaneapua here. So Kaneapua is stuck here and resided on that rock behind me. So while Kaneapua is stranded, he stays here in Kaunolu, and he meets a Hawaiian woman, and together they actually make the first Hawaiians on Lanai. So an interesting thing about this story is that Kaneapua is actually the progenitor or a high ancestor of many Hawaiians from Lanai. So after a while, Kaneapua stays here, and eventually he sees a va'a, or a voyaging canoe, coming on the horizon. Eventually, when it comes close enough and he's able to communicate with them, he learns that it's from the high chief from Hawaii Island, Wahanui. So after talking, he realizes that they want to go to Kahiki. They try to go to Kahiki, and Kaneapua asks them if they have room on their va'a for him to go with them. And they don't know who he is, but they say, no, we don't have enough room, sorry. So they attempt to go out to Kahiki, which is going from Kealai Kahiki, the channel between Kaho'olawe and Lanai. But then they encounter a really wild storm that's churning the water. The wind is whipping, the boat almost capsizes or turns over. So then they come back. They wait for the storm to pass. And then they try again. The wind starts whipping, the storm is churning, the water is getting more and more violent. And then they come back, but then now they're thinking something is wrong. Kaneapua must have been someone very important that they didn't realize when he requested to be on their trip back to Kahiki. So eventually they allow him on their va'a because now they realize there's something about him that had to do with them not being able to go out to sea just because they did not allow him to be on board. And so whenever we see this spot behind us, Kalaio Kaneapua, we can think of these mo'olelo.
Aloha, today we're at Kahale Palawa to tell an oral history account of voyaging and navigation here on Lanai. So we know that across the Pai'aina of Hawaii, Hawaiians were known to be navigators and voyagers, but it's really awesome to hear of stories that are specifically of this place. So this story has to deal with the boat that transported mail from Lahaina to Kahale Palawa, known as the Nunu Laveleka. Now the Nunu Laveleka was a Western-style ship made in San Francisco that was commissioned by Charles Gay, but it was captained by Daniel Kaopuiki Sr., who is known affectionately on island by some residents as Tutu Papa. And so as the story goes, there was a visitor to Lanai known as Kauka Wilder, who used to come and see the Nunu Laveleka in action. And he was convinced that there was nothing that could beat this boat. It was so fast, so effective, and swift on the water that there was nothing that could beat it. Even the most powerful and biggest ships couldn't beat this boat. And so he put a call out to different owners of yachts on Maui and the surrounding areas to say who would like to take the challenge up against the Nunu Laveleka. Now there was one owner who said, yep, I'll accept the challenge. And the race happened a couple of months after that. And so in the story that I know, on board the Nunu Laveleka was Daniel Kaopuiki Sr. and his brother, Noʻeau Kaopuiki. They set sail from Keka'a on Ka'anapali, where the Ka'anapali Hotel is today, all the way to Kahale Palawa. Now, when they first started this race, the yacht owners made a beeline straight to Kahale Palawa from Maui. Right? But they saw Tutu Papa and Uncle Noa going north instead. Now, when they saw them going in that direction, they thought, oh, for sure this race is over because they're not even going in the correct direction of Kahale Palawa, right? Those guys are crazy. But what ended up happening is that Tutu Papa and Uncle Noa went north so that they could catch the currents right down to Kahale Palawa, which ended up being way faster. So as the story goes, Tutu Papa and Uncle Noa beat the yacht owners by a mile, which if you're considering how big the Noʻeau Channel is, that's quite a far distance. So that's just one story told by one ohana about voyaging and navigation here on the Kemoku side. Right? But we know that there were many more ships, many more ohana that knew these waters so well and expertly, that were so skilled in navigating Noʻeau Channel in any kind of weather, no matter if it was calm as it comes or if it was very treacherous. In this module and throughout the program, we hope that you've been able to find connection through the mo'olelo of land and sea. Here we are today in Makai, right, and the ocean is typically used to see something as divisive, right? Like the ocean makes us isolated, the ocean makes us reliant upon ourselves. But we challenge you to think of the ocean as something that connects us. Right? So whether that be on short trips to Oahu or Maui or wherever it takes you on this paeaina o Hawaii and beyond on Papahonuamea, right? We want you to think of this as your pathway to wherever you would like to go, and then when you return to always use the holomoana to come back home. Throughout this program, we hope that you've been able to find connection from the mo'olelo, from land and sea. Whether that be from the top of Lanai Hale all the way down to the shores of Kaunalu. Along this journey, we've been ohing, we've been gathering materials to weave this lei of pride for Lanai. And we hope at this point that you have enough understanding and you've gathered enough to be able to weave your own lei of ha'aheo for Lanai.